You think discipline is about pushing harder, waking up at 5 a.m., forcing another workout, locking your phone away with guilt in your throat, white-knuckling through distractions while every part of you screams for rest. But if that was the answer, why are you still stuck? Why do you still break your own promises? Why does motivation fade the moment life gets heavy again? You're not lazy. You're not broken. You're just trying to win a war using the wrong weapon. Because what we've been sold as discipline is really just self-punishment in disguise. And eventually, willpower cracks under the weight of your own expectations. You tell yourself, I just need to try harder next time. But what if trying harder is the very thing pulling you away from real, sustainable change? What if the people who seem effortlessly consistent, the ones who actually build long-term habits, aren't stronger than you? They're just using a different system. They've stopped chasing motivation. They've stopped relying on brute force. And they've learned how to build gentle discipline, the kind that flows from within, not against you. Real discipline isn't war. It's alignment. It's clarity. It's self-respect. It's building systems that honor your energy instead of draining it. And once you understand this, you stop the cycle. You stop burning out. You stop collapsing every time life throws you off schedule. Because now you're not fighting yourself. You're building with yourself. In this video, we're going to dismantle everything you thought you knew about willpower. We'll show you the psychology behind why willpower fails, the science behind sustainable habits, and the mindset shift that finally makes real discipline feel possible. This isn't about shortcuts. It's about building a foundation so strong, you don't have to start over every time things get hard. Because if you're tired of punishing yourself in the name of progress, it's time to try something radically different. And it starts right here. Discipline is choosing between what you want now and what you want most. That's what they told you. But no one warned you how heavy that choice becomes when you're exhausted, uncertain, or quietly falling apart. You've been taught that success belongs to those who push harder, that people with discipline are just stronger, more focused, more determined. And when you slip, skip the gym, eat the junk food, binge the show, you don't just feel guilt, you feel shame, like something inside you is fundamentally flawed. But here's the truth, you don't fail because you're weak. You fail because your system is built on collapse. Willpower, the way most people use it, is a short-term burst, a surge of internal pressure that says, do it, now, or you're nothing. And that kind of pressure? It burns fast. It doesn't build habits, it builds rebellion. Because when you force yourself through willpower alone, you're not creating alignment, you're creating resistance. Let's look at the science. Dr. Andrew Huberman, a neuroscientist at Stanford, explains that willpower is a limited resource. It functions much like a muscle. It fatigues with overuse. So if your entire behavior change plan depends on resisting temptation day after day, you're setting yourself up for failure from the beginning. And Feldman Barrett, a leading psychologist, has shown that emotions aren't just reactions. They're constructed predictions based on your past. So every time you fail and beat yourself up, you're teaching your brain that discipline equals pain, failure, and fear. Guess what that creates? Avoidance, not consistency. It's not that you didn't try hard enough. It's that your body and brain have learned to associate discipline with threat. So they protect you by making you scroll, procrastinate, self-sabotage. Not because you're lazy, but because you've been running on punishment instead of partnership. And here's the kicker. The people who look like they have unbreakable discipline, they're not depending on willpower at all. They've learned to build internal drive, not external pressure. They've made their habits so gentle, sustainable, and identity-based that discipline feels like self-respect, not self-harm. And that's where everything changes. Because when you realize that discipline isn't a punishment to endure, but a relationship to rebuild, you finally stop fighting yourself. You stop waiting for the perfect mood. You stop quitting every time you fall behind. And you start building habits from the inside out. This is the beginning of real discipline. Not the kind that hurts, but the kind that heals. Let's be honest. Most of us didn't learn discipline. We learned obedience to rigid schedules, to external rules, to silent self-abuse passed off as strength. You were taught that being disciplined meant waking up at dawn, crushing cold showers, skipping anything enjoyable, and pushing through, no matter how dead you feel inside. That was never discipline. That was theater. and you've been performing for a crowd that never claps. In the American grind culture, discipline is often romanticized as suffering, as if pain proves progress, as if burnout is a badge of honor. But how many times have you followed those rules, only to end up exactly where you started? You start strong. You go all in. You feel powerful for 3 days, maybe a week. Then life gets loud. Work piles up. You miss a workout. You forget to journal. And suddenly, it's over. You label it as failure. But the real failure was in the design. Discipline that demands perfection is discipline that's doomed to die. Because here's what no one told you. Your brain isn't wired to thrive under constant threat. When you use shame to stay on track, you're activating your survival systems, not your growth systems. Your prefrontal cortex, responsible for long-term planning and behavioral regulation, goes offline when your inner critic is in control. You're not building discipline, you're building trauma loops disguised as productivity. Even Nietzsche, who many misquote as the champion of brutal will, warned us, "He who fights monsters must take care not to become one." If your discipline turns you into your own monster, you've missed the point. And what about Machiavelli? Often seen as ruthless, yes, but even he understood the psychology of power. He knew that people follow what feels like stability, not terror. The same is true for your own mind. Discipline that lasts isn't born from fear, it's born from trust. And trust isn't built in extremes, it's built in consistency. So the next time you see someone who shows up day after day, not burned out, not dramatic, just steady, don't assume they're more motivated than you. Assume they've stopped performing. Assume they've redefined what discipline actually means. And maybe it's time you do too. Because the old model, it never worked. Not for your brain, not for your body, not for your soul. And until you release the performance, you'll never discover the quiet power waiting underneath. There's a moment, maybe you've felt it, where you finally get tired of yelling at yourself, tired of the cold alarms, the endless, get your shit together speeches in your own head, the spreadsheet habits, the dopamine hacks, the productivity porn. You're tired of playing drill sergeant in a war you never signed up for. And quietly, you ask, isn't there a better way? There is. And it starts when your discipline begins to listen, not to excuses, but to you, the real you, the version that wants to grow and also wants to feel safe doing it. We've been taught that change requires friction. And yes, change does require discomfort, but it doesn't require self-abandonment. Real discipline is like a good therapist, firm, clear, but endlessly compassionate. It doesn't let you lie to yourself, but it also doesn't shame you for being tired. This kind of discipline doesn't bark commands, it asks questions. What do you actually need today? Is this habit helping or hurting? Are you building this from love or from fear? And here's the paradox. The more you listen, the more consistent you become. Because suddenly, your goals aren't punishment, they're alignment. You start to build habits that match your real life, not some fantasy version of who you should be by now. And when setbacks come, you adapt instead of collapse. Dr. Huberman talks often about neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change in response to experience. But that change doesn't happen under stress and shame. It happens under safety and repetition. The brain needs cues of safety to shift. That's why gentle discipline works better long-term than willpower-driven regimes. And here's something people miss. Gentle doesn't mean weak. Gentle means precise. It means you stop wasting energy on perfectionism and start focusing on what truly moves the needle, even if it's small, even if it's slow, even if no one else sees it. Because the goal is no longer to impress, it's to evolve. And evolution is rarely loud. It's quiet, cellular, cumulative. That's what makes it unshakable. So if your discipline has been screaming, maybe it's time to teach it how to listen. Because the version of you you're becoming deserves to be heard, not commanded. A routine tells you what to do. A ritual tells you why it matters. And the difference changes everything. Every self-help book talks about routines. Morning routines of successful people. Night routines for peak performance. Stack this habit. Track that metric. Repeat until dead. But let's be real. How many routines have you started and then dropped a week later? Not because you're undisciplined, but because they felt empty, meaningless, mechanical. Another checkbox in a life already overloaded with noise. The truth? Routines without ritual become lifeless. They become punishment wearing productivity's mask. A ritual, on the other hand, is different. It doesn't just organize your time, it grounds your being. Rituals are intentional. They're infused with emotion, memory, even symbolism. They're not about optimization, they're about orientation. Let's take an example. You can wake up and immediately check emails, slam coffee, scroll headlines. That's routine, autopilot. Your nervous system hijacked before you even start your day. Or, you can wake up and take 90 seconds to sit in silence, feel your feet on the floor, breathe, and remind yourself, I am not my urgency. I move from clarity. That's not a hack. That's a ritual. And your brain treats it completely differently. Barrett's research on emotional construction shows that the meaning we assign to actions directly shapes our neural architecture. If you feel like something matters, your body and mind align around it. Rituals create what we might call intentional repetition, the kind that builds identity through conscious choice. As Nietzsche wrote about becoming who you are, what does not kill me makes me stronger, not through suffering, but through deliberate self-creation. Maya Angelou rented a hotel room with nothing but a Bible, thesaurus, and yellow pads, the same setup every time she wrote. Not because she had to, but because ritual creates psychological readiness. And here's what's wild. These micro-rituals, they build momentum without burnout. They don't require 5 a.m. discipline or bulletproof tracking. They require presence, a pause, a purpose. Ritual is what turns brushing your teeth into self-respect, what turns journaling into identity reinforcement, what turns a walk into a psychological reset. You're not just doing the thing anymore. You're investing in the version of you you're becoming, because when your actions have soul, they start to stick. So if your routines keep breaking, maybe it's time to ask, where's the ritual? Where's the meaning? Where's the me inside this habit? When you find that, you don't need to force discipline anymore. You'll move because it matters. Not all breakdowns scream. Some come dressed as routines. Some wear smiles, some happen in silence, right on schedule. You are doing everything right. Wake up early, drink water, track habits, post the win on Instagram, repeat. From the outside, you looked in control, but inside, you were slowly slipping, and no one noticed, not even you. Because collapse doesn't always look like a crisis. Sometimes it looks like compliance, like showing up to work, but feeling hollow, like eating healthy but hating your reflection anyway, like finishing your checklist, then lying in bed feeling like you didn't exist at all. That's the collapse no one talks about, the one where you did everything discipline told you to do, and still ended up lost. And here's the thing, that kind of collapse doesn't happen overnight. It builds in layers. You ignore your fatigue, call it weakness. You suppress your needs, call it focus. You override your body, call it ambition. Until one day your mind quietly stops trusting you, not because you failed, but because you kept demanding without listening. This is where most people give up, but this is also where real clarity begins. Because breakdowns are data, they're not shame. They're signals. Your exhaustion is a message. What you're doing isn't working. Not for your nervous system, not for your values, not for your future. Andrew Huberman often talks about homeostatic overload, when the body's stress systems stay activated for too long, eventually causing shutdown. This shutdown isn't laziness, it's biological protection, a final attempt to get you to pause. And in that pause, you might notice something for the first time in years. You were never building discipline. You were building defense against failure, against vulnerability, against the fear that if you stop moving, you'll disappear. But here's what you missed. Stillness isn't death. Stillness is a doorway. It's the moment the noise clears long enough for you to ask, what am I really doing this for? Who taught me that I had to suffer to be strong? Carl Jung once wrote that, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This collapse, this quiet undoing, is your chance to stop calling suffering your destiny. Because maybe the collapse wasn't the end. Maybe it was the first honest step toward real discipline, the kind that begins not with a command, but with a breath. Imagine this. Discipline no longer feels like a war. It feels like a rhythm, not rigid, not chaotic, but yours. That's what happens when you stop outsourcing your structure to shame and start rewriting discipline from within. But here's the thing. This shift doesn't begin with a new habit tracker. It begins with self-trust. Most of us try to build discipline the way we were parented, schooled, or managed at work, through fear, reward, and control. But the discipline that lasts, it's built like a relationship. It listens, it adjusts, it honors. It doesn't scream, "Keep going," when your body is shutting down. It asks, "What would support look like right now?" And support isn't the opposite of discipline. Support is discipline, when it's healthy. Take consistency, for example. We've been taught it means doing the same thing the same way, every single day. But real consistency is adaptability with integrity. It's waking up and saying, "I promised myself I'd show up, so I will, but I'll do it in a way that respects where I am today." That's not being soft. That's being strategic. Huberman's research supports this. He's shown that long-term behavioral change is more successful when built on predictable reward systems and flexible structure, not rigid intensity. You're not trying to dominate your nervous system. You're trying to partner with it. And that requires a shift from punishment to programming, from forcing action to designing an environment and identity that naturally supports the behavior you want. Think about it. You brush your teeth not because you're motivated, but because it's part of who you are. That's internalized discipline, and you can do the same with anything: writing, moving, eating, creating, but only when the action aligns with the identity you're choosing, not the identity you're performing. This is where Nietzsche becomes relevant again. His idea of becoming who you are, not who others need you to be, is discipline at its highest form, because the ultimate act of discipline is choosing to live in alignment with your values, even when no one's watching, even when no one's clapping, even when your old self whispers, "You've changed." Yes, you have, because this time you're not trying to be impressive, you're trying to be whole. Sometimes the clearest moment of your life comes right after everything inside you breaks. Not loud, not cinematic, just true. You don't always realize its clarity when it arrives. It doesn't come with fireworks or revelations. No aha moment, just a quiet, undeniable awareness. This isn't working. And for once, you stop blaming your effort. You stop blaming your willpower. You stop blaming yourself. Because the truth is, you weren't weak. You were disconnected. Disconnected from your needs, from your rhythm, from the kind of discipline that actually honors your nervous system, not assaults it. Let's be clear. Collapse isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's a slow erosion of self beneath a perfectly functioning surface. You show up, you reply to emails, you do the workouts, you post the progress, but you feel nothing, no meaning, no energy, no momentum. And then, one quiet morning you realize, you're not progressing, you're performing, and it's killing something inside you. Dr. Andrew Huberman has spoken at length about the role of neurochemical alignment in motivation. When dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine are misfiring due to chronic stress or overstimulation, your drive doesn't just fade, it becomes misdirected. You start chasing tasks instead of chasing purpose. And that's what collapse really is. Not a failure of strength, but a failure of direction. You were climbing, but the ladder was against the wrong wall. Mystics have long called this the dark night of the soul, that moment when old structures fall away to make room for something truer. Jung would call it individuation, becoming who you actually are, not who you think you should be. Not a breakdown, but a breakthrough, disguised as emptiness, because only when everything falls apart can the false structures fall with it. This is where clarity is born, not from force, but from stopping long enough to listen. You begin to see the habits you built weren't wrong, they just weren't yours. The routines you followed weren't weak, they were misaligned. The goals you chased weren't empty, but they weren't connected to your values. Now, you get to choose again, from clarity, from calm, from truth. The discipline you rebuild here won't need pressure. It will move with precision. It will feel clean, quiet, real, and that's how you'll know it's finally yours. Not borrowed, not imposed, not copied. Yours. Because when you stop fighting yourself, you start listening. And in that listening, a new kind of power emerges. Not the kind that burns you alive, but the kind that builds something unshakable, from the inside out. You didn't fail the system failed you. But now, for the first time, you're not asking how to be more disciplined. You're asking how to be more you. There comes a moment And maybe this is it, where you stop trying to become a version of yourself that you were never meant to be. You stop chasing perfection. You stop starving for approval. You stop thinking discipline is about silencing your feelings and pushing through pain. And instead, you begin to return to a version of you that wants to build a life, not survive one. A version that no longer believes discipline is about waking up at 5 a.m. and punishing your way to success. Because now you know, discipline without meaning is just another mask, and meaning without structure becomes just another broken dream. The new standard, your standard, is the union of both. It's not about controlling every hour of your day. It's about becoming someone who shows up for their values, even when no one is watching, especially when it's hard, especially when it's quiet. And no, it won't be perfect. You'll miss days. You'll fall off. You'll feel the pull to go back to what was easier, more familiar, more performative. But something in you won't let you, because once you've tasted what it's like to live in alignment, not chasing motivation, not collapsing under guilt, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to a life built on pressure. You want more now, not more productivity, more truth, more agency, more peace. And here's the shift. You stop asking, how do I stay disciplined? And you start asking, what kind of life am I willing to build, over and over again, because it matters to me? That's the discipline that lasts, the discipline that heals, the discipline that doesn't break you. It becomes you. You're not weak. You were building on someone else's blueprint. Now you're starting over with your own hands, your own story, your own timing. And yes, it will take effort, but it won't feel like war anymore. It will feel like returning to yourself, patiently, quietly, fully. So here you are, not fixed, not finished, but finally aligned. And this time, you're not going back, because you know too much, because you felt the difference, because for the first time, you see the road ahead, and it actually looks like home. You've heard it all before. Discipline is everything. Push harder. No excuses. But no one told you this. Discipline doesn't start with force. It starts with truth. And the truth is, you were never meant to suffer your way to self-respect. You were meant to build something honest, something steady, something that doesn't collapse every time life gets messy. This isn't about changing overnight. It's about becoming someone who no longer abandons themselves in the name of performance. You don't need to master your willpower. You need to reconnect with what matters and build your life, one honest habit at a time, around that. This is your moment, not to do more, but to begin differently. So if this spoke to something real inside you, if it felt like something finally clicked, then don't leave it here. Comment below. What belief about discipline are you ready to let go of? Say it out loud. Claim it. Not for me, for you. Subscribe, because this channel isn't about pretending to be strong. It's about building the kind of strength that actually holds, in silence, in setbacks, in real life. And if you're still here, you already know, you don't need to become someone else. You just need to stop running from who you've always been. This is your reset. This is your foundation. The new standard has begun, inside you, right now.